Formula One stakeholders have unanimously decided to isolate the Saturday race from the rest of the event by changing the format of sprint weekends. This has gone down well with some and not so well with others. Fans love to see more racing, but drivers and teams are wary of all the consequences more racing could bring, especially now there is a budget cap in place. This means that every crash, minor or major, is costing the teams money and potential upgrades. Is this really the new generation for F1? The first two seasons of the experimental sprint format had 3 races, with a short Saturday race setting the grid for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Following suggestions from fans, broadcasters and event organisers, F1 opted to expand the number of sprint weekends to 6 in 2023. A late decision of the F1 Commission on Tuesday brought revisions with the purpose of motivating drivers to compete harder in the sprint itself, ahead of the season's first sprint event in Azerbaijan. But will this make any difference? So this is what the new sprint weekend format will look like. Friday, FP1 and qualifying for the Grand Prix. Saturday, which is now called the Sprint Day, will host a sprint shootout. And the sprint race and Sunday stays the same, only focused on the race. Friday will include a single 1-hour practice session and a qualifying session, as originally announced. So the teams only have 1 hour to set up their car, making the simulator time even more important. That qualifying session later on Friday will now determine the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix. On Saturday, which F1 is calling Sprint Day, a shorter qualifying session known as the Sprint Shootout will be held using the current Q1, Q2, Q3 structure. It'll run around 45 minutes with shorter portions than full qualifying and 2 different mandatory tyre compounds throughout the 3 sessions. Q1, which is 12 minutes with medium tyres, Q2, which is 10 minutes with medium tyres, and Q3, which is 8 minutes with soft tyres. This will give drivers fewer laps, increasing the risk, with Q3 possibly including only 1 run. The sprint qualifying session determines the grid for the sprint race, which currently only gives points, 8 for the winner to 1 for 8th, and has no influence on the grid for Sunday. The Grand Prix will remain the sole event on Sunday. One of the reasons for the modified sprint format in Formula One is to urge drivers to push harder in the Saturday race. Will it, however? The idea is that because the sprint no longer determines the grid for the Grand Prix, drivers have less to lose because a mishap while trying to gain a position would have no effect on the big race itself. As a result, the risk-reward equation that every driver must constantly calculate is altered. It ignores the fact that damage does not come cheap, especially under the cost cap. Drivers cannot afford to be careless since there is still a risk. Even if the cost restriction wasn't an issue, there's the basic truth that parts are occasionally in short supply. You don't want to waste parts even if the metaphorical spares truck is full. It also restricts the potential gains possible in the race. If you are in or near the top 8, each position gained earns 1 point, which is valuable. This can translate to a 2-point difference versus a direct competitor. While there is a danger, there is also a reward. But the reward has been diminished because you no longer get a grid spot for performing an overtake. Under the former regulations, a position in the top 8 provided not just 1 point boost, but also the possibility of additional points the following day, due to a jump up the grid. On Saturday, 12 of the 20 drivers will not score at all. The majority of those will have no realistic chance of scoring points unless something unforeseen happens. If you are racing 15th, there's no need to take 14th, although there was earlier since it provided you a better grid position for Sunday's race. Then there is the lack of pit stops, and the fact that the bulk of the field will start on the same tyre reduces strategic diversity. It's a simple run to the end. Given that starting places are determined by qualifying pace, the cars will line up nearly in order of strength, so don't anticipate a lot of movement. That's especially true considering that everyone in the sprint is following a simple and identical, except for a little difference in tyre compound plan. Then there is the issue of overtaking, which hasn't drastically changed since the new regulations. The drivers still rely heavily on DRS, and this will not change for the sprint races. The bulk of the drivers in the 6 sprints held so far will have driven with the idea to make up places, but just lack the resources and chance. This will not change with the new sprints. It remains to be seen if the alteration has the desired effect, or if it will have considerably less of an impact. A final choice of sprint format will require a number of sprints. However, considering the stakes are smaller than they were for F1's first 6 sprint races due to the disconnection from the Sunday race, this looks like a step backwards for the sprint format. So Baku is the first F1 sprint race to be contested on a street circuit, and the decision to make the sprint a separate event has increased the likelihood of an accident occurring, as a fall down the order will not cost places. This change is done mostly to encourage drivers to take greater risks and put on a bigger show on Saturday, because their grid positions for Sunday's major race will not be affected. As an added obstacle, the Miami GP comes place the following weekend, requiring teams to compete in 3 street races in 9 days, with little time to ship replacement components to Florida if they are needed. And this has caused uproar amongst the grid, as parts are costly and sometimes even scarce. I'm nervous about sprint in Baku because you just have not enough time to repair if you have major damage, said Aston Martin team principal Mike Crack when asked about the risks. Because straight after the sprint, you have the covers on, and in the morning, you have only 3-4 hours to repair your car if it's heavily damaged. So there is a high risk with that exercise, but Baku, it is not so difficult to overtake. If you take high risk in the corners, then there is high risk obviously, but I think it'll be a good show. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella said that damage is a worry. Yes, we are nervous, the Italian said. At the same time, we are supportive of increasing the spectacle through the sprint races. Somehow we have to adapt. There's also conversations open with the FIA and F1. So this is a collaborative process. Ultimately, we'll have to find the optimal point for the spectacle, and also for teams to manage parts and to manage the costs in the cost cap. In the framework of the cost cap, teams must strike a balance between having enough spare components to get through the street circuit weekends, and without producing too many versions of a specification that may soon be obsolete as they improve their cars. It's always on your mind with budget cap, said AlphaTauri technical director Jody Egginton. The last thing you want is bits sitting on the shelf that you haven't run because you've obsoleted them and moved on without getting any benefit from them. So yeah, there is a risk. It's like back in the day in Monaco. You always wanted to make sure you had enough stuff because you were never sure what could happen. It's risk and reward. We'll take the approach we normally take and see where we are. But you can't afford, especially when you've got a very strong development program, to be making any excess parts. With our floor program, we have to manage it very carefully, because the floor development is planned to be strong, so you don't want stock lying around that you don't need. But at the same time, if you get a miss hit with one of the updates, you want to make sure you can roll back and have enough stock. Christian Horner thinks the same. If one thing goes wrong, the whole budget of the year could be at risk. For him, the sprint race at a street circuit seems too risky. The reality is, it's absolutely ludicrous to be doing the first sprint race of the year in a street race like Azerbaijan, said Horner when asked about the risk of damage. I think from a spectacle point of view, from a fan point of view, it's probably going to be one of the most exciting sprint races of the year. From a cost cap perspective, all you can do is trash your car, and it costs a lot of money around there. So one race is enough in Baku. The fact that we've got 2, there could be some action there. But that's part of the challenge and it's part of the task that we've got. Hopefully we can tidy up the format for the sprint races coming up, that they are a bit more dynamic. I know that the sporting directors have been working hard on that, and hopefully we can get that finalised. A sprint race in Azerbaijan is something to be certainly wary of. So now that we've reached the end of today's video, our question to you is the same as to the team bosses. Are you happy to see more sprint races this season? And what is your opinion on all the proposed changes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.